So let's start. Number 10, the Mariana snailfish. Science had done the math, carefully, precisely, with decades of research behind it. There was a pressure threshold beyond which no vertebrate could survive. The numbers were clear, the biology was settled. Past a certain depth, the molecules that hold living cells together simply break down. No bones, no organs, no nervous system could hold itself intact under that kind of force. It was one of those facts that didn't feel like a theory. It felt like a wall. Then, at 8,336 meters beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, something was found hunting, not drifting, not dying, hunting. The Mariana snailfish is small, pale, and almost translucent. It looks fragile, almost unfinished, like something that shouldn't exist at all. At that depth, the pressure exceeds 800 times what you feel standing on the surface. It is the kind of force that would crush a human body instantly. And yet there it was, the deepest fish ever recorded, moving through the dark completely unbothered. Every published pressure survival limit for vertebrate life had to be revised, not adjusted, rewritten. Scientists didn't just find a fish that broke a record. They found a fish that had been living below the ceiling science built, for longer than anyone had been watching. The ocean didn't push the limit. It ignored it entirely. Number 9, the siphonophore. There is a rule in biology so fundamental it rarely gets questioned. An animal is one body, one organism, one life. It has edges. It begins somewhere and ends somewhere. That boundary is what separates it from the world around it. Every creature ever studied, cataloged, and named operated within that definition. Scientists weren't looking for exceptions because there was no reason to expect one. Then, in the waters off the Australian coast, researchers sent a submersible into the deep and found something that made that definition fall apart. 45 meters long, the longest animal ever recorded on Earth. The siphonophore looks like a single creature. It moves like one, but it isn't. What appears to be one animal is actually thousands of individual organisms called zooids, each one specialized, each one performing a specific function. Some digest, some propel, some reproduce, some simply hold the structure together. None of them can survive alone. None of them are the animal. All of them are. Biologists had to stop and ask a question they never expected to ask. What exactly is an individual? It wasn't a creature discovered at the edge of a known category. It was a creature that made the category itself look incomplete. One body, one life, one organism. It turned out the ocean never agreed to those terms. Number 8, the mantis shrimp. Science built an entire framework on a logic that seemed unbreakable. More color receptors mean better color vision. It follows naturally, almost mathematically. Humans have 3 receptors and can distinguish roughly 10 million colors. So when researchers discovered an animal with 16, the assumption was immediate. Whatever this creature sees must be extraordinary, richer, deeper, more layered than anything a human eye could process. The science pointed in one direction, and everyone followed it without hesitation. The mantis shrimp has 16 color receptors. It processes color worse than you do, not slightly worse. Measurably, consistently, demonstrably worse. The reason shattered the framework entirely. The mantis shrimp doesn't process color in its brain the way humans do. It processes color at the receptor level, making instant binary decisions, this wavelength or not, before the signal even travels inward. It trades richness for speed. Where a human brain blends and compares, the mantis shrimp simply reacts. Every model scientists had built connecting receptor count to visual sophistication had to be dismantled. Years of published research, careful, peer-reviewed, confidently presented. All of it built on an assumption that a small crustacean quietly disproved just by opening its eyes. The most complex eye in the animal kingdom sees less than yours, and the most humbling part is how long it took anyone to check. Number 7, the cookie-cutter shark. Predation makes intuitive sense. A predator needs to be powerful enough, large enough, and fast enough to overcome its prey. That relationship between size and hunting strategy was so logical, so consistently observed across millions of species, that it barely registered as an assumption anymore. It was just the way things worked. The natural order had a kind of built-in proportionality. Big hunters pursue big prey. Small creatures stay within their limits. The cookie-cutter shark is 50 centimeters long, less than the length of your arm. It hunts sperm whales, not by killing them outright. The cookie-cutter latches onto its target, twists its entire body in a precise rotating motion, and carves out a clean circular plug of flesh. Neat. Efficient. Completely unbothered by what it has just bitten. Sperm whales, dolphins, large tuna, all carry the same distinctive circular scars. But marine life wasn't where the story ended. At least 2 United States nuclear submarines had to be taken in for repairs after cookie-cutter sharks bit through their rubber sonar domes. A 50-centimeter animal had disabled billion-dollar military hardware by doing what it simply does. The assumption that predation strategies are constrained by body size was quietly retired. Somewhere in the deep, something barely the length of your arm is taking bites out of things the size of buildings, and it has been doing it long before anyone thought to look. Number 6. Deep sea bioluminescence. Science had looked at the deep ocean and reached a comfortable conclusion. Bioluminescence was rare. A handful of unusual species had evolved the ability to produce their own light, strange adaptations in a strange environment, curious enough to study, exotic enough to fascinate, but ultimately exceptional. Edge cases. The deep ocean was dark, hostile, and mostly empty, and the few creatures that glowed were simply outliers in an otherwise lightless world. That was the consensus. Carefully built, widely accepted, and completely wrong. In 2020, a Smithsonian research team set out to formally measure how common bioluminescence actually was in the deep ocean. What they found stopped them cold. Between 75 and 90% of all deep-sea creatures produce their own light. Not some, not many, nearly all of them. The deep ocean is the largest habitat on Earth. It covers more of this planet than all land surfaces combined. And its dominant form of communication, the primary language spoken across the majority of life on this planet, was something science had been filing under rare and unusual for decades. Bioluminescence wasn't reclassified as slightly more common than expected. It was reclassified as fundamental, a basic property of an entire biosphere. Science had spent years studying the ocean's main language without realizing it was the main language. The ocean had been speaking the whole time. Nobody thought to listen. Number 5. The whale fall ecosystem. Scientists had mapped the deep ocean's food chain, and it made sense. Life down there was scarce, slow, and dependent on what drifted down from above. Marine snow, the faint, constant drizzle of dead organic material falling from the surface, was the foundation. It was meager, but it was enough. The deep sea had organized itself around that scarcity over millions of years. Researchers understood the system. They had modeled it, published it, and taught it. The deep ocean was dark and sparse and largely accounted for. In 1987, a research submersible drifting through the Santa Cruz Basin stumbled onto something nobody had gone looking for: a whale skeleton on the seafloor, and covering it, a community of hundreds of species, many of which had never been seen before, running a fully self-contained ecosystem from a single carcass. It wasn't a curiosity, it was a world. A whale fall, as scientists came to call it, sustains complex biological succession for 50 to 100 years. It moves through distinct ecological stages, each one supporting entirely different communities of life, each one giving way to the next like chapters in a long book. The carcass feeds bacteria, which feed invertebrates, which attract predators, which enrich the sediment around them. Deep-sea ecologists had to create an entirely new ecosystem category, one that had been happening constantly, in every ocean, completely unseen. Beneath the surface, death doesn't end a story. It starts several new ones. Number 4, the anglerfish. Biology rests on certain foundations so basic they are rarely spoken aloud. Male and female are two distinct individuals. That distinction is not a detail. It is the definition of sexual reproduction. Every framework built around mating, genetics, and the passing of traits from one generation to the next depends on two separate organisms coming together, separate bodies, separate lives. That was not an assumption anyone felt the need to defend. It was simply what reproduction meant. For years, scientists dissecting female anglerfish kept finding strange growths fused to their bodies, small, shapeless, parasitic-looking lumps attached to the female's skin. Researchers cataloged them, labeled them, and moved on. They assumed they were parasites. It was the only explanation that made sense. They were the males, not attached, merged, permanently and irreversibly fused into the female's body, their circulatory systems intertwined, their organs dissolved, their entire biological identity reduced to a single pair of testes supplying her with sperm for the rest of her life. The males had been cataloged as a completely separate species for years. Scientists had been classifying the same animal twice, without knowing it, neither one knowing. Number 3, the immortal hydra. Aging is not a flaw. It is not a disease or a malfunction or something that went wrong in the design. It is what multicellular life does. Every organism made of more than one cell accumulates damage over time, loses the ability to repair itself, and eventually dies. That process, senescence, had been observed across every branch of the animal kingdom without a single exception. Researchers had studied it in insects, in mammals, in creatures with lifespans measured in days, and creatures with lifespans measured in centuries. The conclusion was always the same. Everything ages. The clock runs in one direction and it never stops. Then someone looked closely at a freshwater organism less than 1 centimeter long. The hydra shows 0 measurable signs of aging. Not slow aging, not reduced aging, none. Kept in controlled laboratory conditions for decades, its mortality rate does not increase over time. It does not weaken. It does not deteriorate. It continuously replaces its own cells, regenerating itself so completely and so constantly that it is, in a meaningful biological sense, never the same animal twice. It has no known mechanism for aging at all. Scientists weren't studying a creature that lived unusually long. They were studying a creature that appeared to have never received the instruction to age in the first place. In a laboratory somewhere, something smaller than your fingernail is quietly making a mockery of everything biology thought it understood about time. Number 2, the Benjamin Button jellyfish. Every living thing moves in one direction: birth, growth, reproduction, death. That sequence is not a pattern science noticed and recorded. It is the definition of what it means to be alive. A life cycle has a beginning and an end, and the distance between them only ever moves one way. Researchers had studied aging across every branch of life, from bacteria to blue whales, and found the same fundamental truth waiting at the bottom of every investigation. Everything dies, not as a tragedy, as a law. Nobody was looking for an exception. There was no reason to expect one. Turritopsis dohrnii is a jellyfish smaller than a human fingernail. When it is injured, starved, or placed under sufficient stress, it does not die. It reverses. The mature adult transforms itself back into a juvenile polyp, the earliest stage of its life cycle, and begins again, completely. The process can repeat indefinitely. It is the only known animal capable of cycling backwards through its own life cycle, not slowing aging, not pausing it, reversing it entirely. Biological mortality as a universal law was no longer universal. Scientists didn't find an animal that lived a long time. They found an animal that had quietly opted out of the entire arrangement that every other living thing on Earth had silently agreed to. Somewhere in the ocean right now, something is dying, and then simply deciding not to. Number 1, the coelacanth. Extinction has a definition. A species disappears from the fossil record for 65 million years, and it is gone. That is not a guess. That is what the evidence shows, layer by layer, rock by rock, across geological time. Paleontologists had built careers on that definition. Museums had filled their halls with it. Textbooks had printed it in confident, permanent ink. If something had not been seen for 65 million years, it was not hiding. It was finished. December 1938. A South African museum curator named Marjorie Courtenay Latimer is visiting a local fisherman's dock when something in the catch stops her cold. An unusual fish, large, heavy, covered in strange metallic scales she has never seen before. She sketches it carefully and sends the drawing to J.L.B. Smith, the world's leading expert on fish. His response arrived with the urgency of a man whose entire framework had just collapsed beneath him. I would not have been more surprised if I had seen a dinosaur walking down the street. The coelacanth had been extinct for 65 million years. It was alive, unhurried, completely unbothered, living in depths science had barely looked at, in numbers nobody had thought to count. Every species declared extinct on fossil record absence alone had to be reconsidered. The word itself became more complicated. The most qualified fish expert alive was undone by a fisherman's catch. That is not a story about a fish. That is a story about how much ocean remains out there, keeping its secrets, completely unbothered by what we think we know.